Hello, I'm Carl Seibert. Thanks for joining me. As you can see from the headline above my head, Photomechanic Plus is no more. For those of us who used it to manage our photo archives, this is pretty much a sad day. Photomechanic Plus gave us the kind of functionality and performance that you could only otherwise get in big, fancy, heavy-duty digital asset management systems that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was just wonderful, but it's gone. And as I've said many, many times, every in-migration to a digital asset management system is followed by an out-migration. The day you move in, you have to start planning for the day you move out, lest you suffer data loss. And that's what an archive is all about, is not losing our pictures. So after we get done grieving, we've got to move on. We've got to find something that will do this for us, that we can afford, would actually be nice, and transition our workflow over from Photomechanic Plus to that thing. Now, Photomechanic itself is fine. It's still available. Nothing has happened to it. Everything is still the same. Photomechanic Plus, actually, if you have a running copy, will continue to run, and Camera Bits will continue to support it as long as it does. That means that if you have Photomechanic Plus on Windows, you're good. It runs just absolutely fine. If you have Photomechanic Plus on an older Mac operating system, you're also good. It'll continue to work. It's the newest Mac operating systems that are the problem. They basically broke Photomechanic Plus in a way that Photomechanic or Camera Bits just can't fix. So what are we looking at here? Well, there are various alternatives for archiving photos that we could try. One of the things that we could try is that we could try to use an all-in-one program like Lightroom or On One or something like that. That alternative doesn't appeal to me very much because the functionality in those programs, frankly, is not so great. If you're coming from Photomechanic Plus, they're going to seem really lame. And they don't integrate that well with Photomechanic in this case. We're looking for something that can work beside Photomechanic or work even as sort of a component of Photomechanic. And well, yeah, you can do a workflow that goes from Photomechanic to one of those all-in-ones back to Photomechanic, and it's fine. The kind of integration that we're talking about here, they just basically just can't do. The other alternative is some sort of a standalone archiving program. And yeah, there are some that are on the market for photographers. Most of them read all the ones I've tried, and every couple of months somebody brings up another one and I try it. The same thing always happens. I always just stop and go, ooh, and flinch away. There seems to be a consensus kind of coalescing around one product that's got some promise, that looks pretty good. It's reasonable in price, and it looks like it could work for us. It's called NeoFinder. So let's take a look at this thing. It looks kind of like every other archiving, browsing, DAM sort of program that you've ever seen, and for good reason, because we kind of know how that works. In the middle, we have a grid of thumbnails. On one side, we have metadata, and on the other side, we have a navigation sort of a thing. Very much like On One or Lightroom or Photomechanic, for that matter. This, by the way, the metadata thing, they call the inspector. The navigation thing, they call the library pane, although it actually contains your library. And stand by for just a second here. Let me see if I can turn on my cursor gizmo. Yes. It contains your library, and it also contains a bunch of virtual folders. They have albums. Those are the same things we had in Photomechanic Plus, called collections. And we have so-called smart folders. Why it's not smart albums? Who knows? A smart folder, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly the same as a saved search with a different icon. Different programs call them different things. Some programs even kind of have both. In this program, when you save a search, this is what you get. You get a smart folder. Every time you open that folder, you execute the query, and there you have it. It's a kind of a cool thing, as it turns out, because this will replicate Photo Mechanics tab functionality for us. First thing as you look at this, you might go, oh my God, it doesn't have tabs. How will I live? This is how. A tab, in essence, is actually a query in a tab. Pretty much the same thing as a query with an icon over here. So that's all good. You can turn off these sidebars with the two buttons at the corners of the interface. You can also toggle them on and off with the keyboard commands Command I for the metadata one, toggles off, toggles on. Shift Command L toggles off the left-hand one, which I guess stands for library, maybe it stands for left, toggles it back on. Y the Shift key, Command L alone toggles on and off the library part. And as you can see, that can kind of be a bigger thing. This, by the way, we toggle it back on again. This, by the way, is an interesting feature. When you've cataloged your pictures in this particular program, it generates catalogs which then open up to a virtual folder structure that mimics the real folder structure of your archive on disk. Kind of handy for navigation, and it's interesting in a number of ways, but it's important to remember these are virtual folders. They're just pointers in a database. They are not real folders. They don't contain real files. That said, you can actually take one of these things and simply drag it to your desktop, and the program will output that entire folder full of photos in one swallow to your desktop. How cool is that? So, first job that we have to do before we can evaluate this thing or use it or do much of anything with it is we have to move our archive into it. So here we stop for the PSA where we say don't do this or anything else that could possibly affect the future of your photos without a good backup in hand. There is a saying in information technology that you are only as good as your last backup. And I think that that might be the smartest thing that has ever been said in the history of computer science. The good news here is the process of, we're going to put air quotes around it, moving into this new dam doesn't require us to really move anything. In fact, it doesn't require us to touch our pictures other than to read them. We are just creating another index of these pictures. It can, in fact, be in parallel with an index of these pictures in a different program. It's not at all a destructive or risky move. So that is the good thing. It's also dead easy in this program. Now I'm going to have to move my head out of the way here for you. So I'll jump over here to the other side of the screen. And we will look down here at the lower left corner of our screen. There's a big plus, and there is a triangle next to it. Hit the triangle, and we come up here, and we have a couple of options for making new catalogs. We could make a new catalog from a volume, which presumably would be like a portable drive that has nothing on it except folders full of pictures. Probably don't want that one. We probably want this one. We probably want to make a new catalog from a folder. Click the button, and we get a file selector dialog. And in this case, well, I guess probably in most everybody's case, our pictures are going to live on some sort of a server or a NAS or something like that. Could possibly be on the same machine. In any case, we can choose any of the folders in the folder structure of where our pictures live. And this is a share on my server called Data to Pictures. And in it, we have folders by year, and in each of the folders by year, we have a repeating pattern of subfolders. Now, this is a pretty decent sort of way to organize your archive without even a DAM system. And this is, in fact, pretty much what all of us as photographers have done. We all have our pictures organized in, hopefully, some sort of reasonably sensible files and folders hierarchy, a taxonomy that's based on something, and the year is a very common starting point, and goes from there to subfolders. It might be months and weeks, it might be subject matter, it might be different clients, whatever. In any case, in NeoFinder, you can make catalogs of any folder in this hierarchy. I could go up to the top folder and make a catalog that would contain all of these pictures for all of the, I believe there's 7 years in this particular directory tree, or we could break them up and do them individually. Now, some of you may remember that back when I started with Photo Mechanic Plus, I did a taxonomy that was based on subject matter at the top, and I thought it was kind of clever because I could kind of go picture by picture and decide whether it was a family picture or a business picture or whatever, put it in the appropriate catalog. I could then turn those catalogs on and off and filter my collection in that way. It occurred to me pretty early on that maybe that wasn't the smartest thing I ever did, because when I move out of Photo Mechanic Plus, I'm going to lose that functionality. This is an example of starting to think about how you're going to move out the day you move in. So I decided to hedge my bets and do some keywords for categories of photos that would serve that same purpose. So I could turn off or on business photos, personal photos, photos of art, or whatever, by filtering keywords. In any case, we can then take this list, find the folders that we want to use as the root of each of our catalogs, and we can select them. So once we select some folders in here, all we have to do is hit this Start button. We will then see a preferences confirmation dialog that we could suppress, whatever. The defaults are actually fine. We can just OK this and move on. I'm going to cancel it because I have already cataloged these pictures. While we're here looking at it, this is actually kind of interesting. We can see that we can catalog various kinds of files. Photos, yep, okay, fine. Videos, yeah, that's simple enough. Audio files, like as in all kinds of audio files, not just waves of camera notes files. And does everybody else feel as sad as I do that we don't have that capability in any of today's cameras? But in any case, what we do have nowadays is all kinds of things that record audio. Maybe we're doing it for videos, maybe we're doing it for note-taking, whatever. Or for that matter, maybe we just have some music. We want to catalog it. This thing will do that. It understands ID3 metadata, which is what the music industry uses, and that's cool. We can also put text files in this thing. So that's office documents, PDFs, invoices, notes, stories, whatever, and it will not only index them, and we can assign metadata to them, but it will do previews of them. In other words, it will index the text inside the files, and we can search against that. Now, there's a limit. I think it does 5,000 words or something like that, which is actually pretty enormous, but you can't index a book in it. But nevertheless, most all of your text files you can index, and you can search against the text that is in them. Yeah, Spotlight will do that on the Mac, and Windows Index will do that on a Windows machine. But to be able to do it right in your DAM is actually pretty cool, because it means, say in my case, that I could forego paying for a general purpose business sort of DAM. I could just use this instead, potentially. I haven't checked it out, but it's really cool. I'm going to hit cancel. You would hit OK. It goes ahead and it indexes. Yeah. Cancel. I mean, seriously, really cancel. Okay, with that finally canceled and out of the way, NeoFinder would go ahead and make catalogs for us. It is pretty fast. at least on this brand new machine, which is really pretty fast. I have about 150,000 pictures by NeoFinder's count in my archive, and it'll do the whole thing in a matter of just a very few hours. These smaller year-by-year catalogs go by even quicker. Now, NeoFinder's developer recommends doing the smaller catalogs. Now, my idea of doing catalogs that were based on content didn't work out from a data preservation standpoint, but NeoFinder's developer, a fellow named Norbert Dorner, actually suggests that smaller catalogs and more of them perform better in search than great big catalogs. So you're certainly not giving anything up, at least in his opinion. Now, do they really search faster? I couldn't tell you because on this machine searches are so fast that I really just can't quite tell the difference. It does mean that if you have a whole lot of these things, whether it's a lot of years or a lot of something else, we could have some clutter. Fortunately, you can arrange them into folders, which is really pretty cool. And as I said before, you have the ability to turn them off and on in display in the interface. And by the way, the keystrokes are a little hard to Google for. There aren't all that many keystrokes in NeoFinder in the first place, but it's kind of worth writing them down because it kind of took me a while. It was a bit of a struggle to find them. So those keystrokes, once again, Command-I toggles on and off the metadata thing, which, if I click something to bring it up, looks like that. And Shift-Command-L toggles on and off the entire left rail. Now, I suppose I've gone on far enough for some people to be going, oh, okay, maybe this has got some potential. Does it integrate with Photo Mechanic? And the answer is yes. It integrates with Photo Mechanic in the simplest, quickest way possible. I've always been suspicious of complicated integrations between programs. Well, this is not only not complicated, it's so simple it hardly even exists. You simply grab something and you drag it to the Photo Mechanic icon in your dock, which I apologize you can't actually see because it's just below the frame of my screen recording. And boom, you're in Photo Mechanic. You're in the folder that that particular thing lives in, and it's selected right here. So I can do anything in Photo Mechanic that I want to it. I can do renditions by doing Save As. I can copy to export it. I can caption something using the IPTC caption tool, or I can use the metadata template. And there you go. It's just massively super simple. Now, what I just did there with that drag and drop is the same thing that we did in Photo Mechanic by doing show in context. It's now showing me this picture in its real live folder on the real live hard drive, including pictures that may or may not be indexed, which is more of a thing in Photo Mechanic Plus than it is here. And we can do stuff to them, and we can do basically any kind of files and folders thing to them. And of course, we have the navigator in Photo Mechanic, which looks just about like the left rail thingy in NeoFinder. We do have to bear in mind that distinction that the folders that we see in NeoFinder aren't real. These are virtual folders. The folders that we see in Photo Mechanic are real, and they are live on our file system. And in that way, that part is a little more dangerous, let's say, in Photo Mechanic. That's an interesting thought. We'll hang on to that because that is one of the things that we're going to be thinking about as we go through here, particularly as we get to the last part of this series of videos where we will actually do edits in NeoFinder, and we will have to think about whether or not it might have just been a smarter idea to do that edit in Photo Mechanic. Now, we can navigate around in here and we can do things that we would sort of normally expect to do. If we navigate to a picture and we press plus on the keyboard, it will open up in a preview. NeoFinder calls this a light box, which is more of a web development term, but it's kind of the same thing as the preview in Photo Mechanic, as you would expect. The arrow keys will take you from picture to picture in this light box thing, as they call it. The plus key, again, will zoom you into the picture. The X key will zoom you to 100%. The equals key will zoom you back to the full frame. And the escape key will pop you out of the light box. Again, it's worth noting those keyboard commands because, yeah, they're in the documentation for sure, but they might not be the first thing you lay eyes on. So once again, plus key opened it, plus key again zooms out, minus key zooms back. I think I forgot that one the first time. The X key zooms you to 100%. The equals key returns you to the full image, and the escape key pops you back out again. You can see a preview of sorts a different way. If you highlight a picture and you just hit the space bar, that will open up the Macintosh Quick View functionality. It doesn't look anywhere as nice as the full preview functionality, or lightbox functionality, we're calling it, in NeoFinder, but it sure is handy. Quick click and you can see a picture, and then you can move on. So we put pictures into NeoFinder. How do we get pictures back out of NeoFinder? Well, the simple thing is what we've already seen. If I just drag this picture to the desktop, which is slightly out of your field of view, I apologize, it'll copy it right out of NeoFinder. No problem. I can drag it to a folder. I can do whatever. If I go up to the top of NeoFinder and I go to the item menu, I can do save copy as. It's kind of the equivalent of Command Y, or part of Command Y in Photo Mechanic, I suppose. But that will, in fact, get a photo that is in the thing out of it, which is kind of the point. Or I can do export photos to. This is different. At first blush, you go, oh, export, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to export photos out of my database to my desktop or to the rest of the world. Export photos here, this is actually like the save as or save photos as function in Photo Mechanic. This is where you do renditions, and you can make basically smaller sized photos for some particular purpose, and you can rename them and whatnot. Is it as powerful as the equivalent functionality in Photo Mechanic? No, it absolutely isn't. Are we, as Photo Mechanic owners, probably going to use this thing? Maybe, but probably not. When we get right down to it, let's just cancel that and let's just move on. Now, this video in its entirety is going to be punishingly long. I really apologize for that. When I first started it, I thought it was going to be really easy. And then every day with NeoFinder, I discovered some other piece of functionality that was different, that tripped me up, that I had to figure out how to work around. So it took me a long time, and it's going to take me a long time to explain this all to you. Hopefully it will be worth it. Hopefully the things that I found out the hard way, I can tell you about. You won't find out about them the hard way. Until we get to the very end, the risks are relatively low, but nevertheless, every time I stubbed my toe on something, I got frustrated, I got angry with the program, and I distrusted the program. And that's the worst part of it, because that's what we want to build here. We want to find a tool that we can trust. We're going to trust this thing to give us back our pictures when we want them, the correct pictures that we do want, and we don't want anything lost in here. If something is lost and we can't find it, we don't have it. That's about the same as deleting it. Best for everybody if I can save you from at least some of that sort of nonsense. Now, I should move myself back over to the left side of the frame where I belong. What we're going to do here, the next part of this video, is all about search. Basically, an archive is a place we put stuff, and search is how we get the stuff out. Search is going to take a while because there are functions that we can do easily in Photomechanic Plus that are either not so easy or not so obvious in NeoFinder. So it's going to be long, it's going to be nerdy. I apologize for that part, but I can't see a way around it. What I am going to do is do this video in two different formats. One is one gigantic, enormous, epic video, and I'll try to do chapters and whatever, make it as painless as possible. We'll take a couple of intermissions. You can go get a cup of coffee or whatever. I'll also do the video as 3 separate pieces and upload them to YouTube as 3 separate videos. In a way, I think that's better, and I'll make them into a playlist and whatever, but the way YouTube surfaces videos, it's entirely possible that you'll find part 3 and it won't be obvious how to get to part 1 and 2. So for folks who just don't want to go there in the first place, there will be the one great big gigantic one. So I'll see everybody back, or hopefully everybody, I guess, in the next segment, which is going to be about searching in NeoFinder. Hello, I'm Carl Seibert. Thanks for joining me. Welcome to part 2 of my 3-part opus on using NeoFinder as a replacement for Photomechanic Plus. If you've joined us at this point on this video, you should know that there is another video that's an introduction and a brief tour of the functionality in NeoFinder, and yet another video that will talk about reading and editing and working with metadata in NeoFinder. This one is the big one. This one is on searching. So let's get into it. The first thing that we see, or a place to start, even though you may ultimately not elect to use it, is in the corner of the NeoFinder interface. We have Quick Find, and it's a search box, pretty much like the search box that we had in Photomechanic Plus, or at least it kind of looks that way. And if you remember from my very first Photomechanic Plus video, most of our searches are really simple. There are a couple of search terms. We do them, we're done. We don't have to think about them. We don't have to think about how we're doing them. We don't have to think about whether or not we can do fancier, more powerful, or quote-unquote better searches. We just do them and we're done with it. So we type something into our search box in our corner, and that's that. What we will type in this case, I once shot an art class at my favorite coffee shop, which is called Maggie's. So I'm going to do art Maggie's, and I'm going to hit the button, and lo and behold, hey, it worked. Now what happened when I did this is the system put a Boolean and in between each of the words, or it replaced spaces with a Boolean and. So the search here that we're really doing is art and Maggie's. Then in Photomechanic Plus, this business with the apostrophe just kind of wasn't a problem, and I could ignore it. Now, if I did the apostrophe in Photomechanic Plus would in fact search the string Maggie's, apostrophe included, and return results accordingly. On the other hand, I could just skip the apostrophe and I would get the same results. Now, here, the apostrophe counts. NeoFinder sees punctuation and counts it as a character every single time. Now, that is likely to lead to some unexpected results, which is our first problem that we really need to address when we talk about learning a new damn software. We're going to work with the thing, and if we're used to something else, we're going to do stuff the way we're used to doing it, and we're going to get unexpected results. That's going to make us distrust the new program, and rightfully so. We don't want to accept going in that everything is absolutely peachy keen until it proves itself to us. And it's very likely to lead to being frustrated and being angry and wasting a whole lot of time. Thus it is with this silly apostrophe. Because I never really had to bother with it in Photo Mechanic Plus, I had forgotten, if I ever knew, that quotation marks, be they single or double, come in two different flavors. We have the straight, ordinary, pedestrian, simple quotation marks, and we have the quote-unquote smart quotation marks, otherwise known as typographic quotation marks, or pretty quotation marks, or 96 quotation marks, or whatever. They have lots of names. They're the curly ones. They're the fancy ones. They are a completely different ISO character from the straight ones. In other words, a curly apostrophe is totally different from a straight apostrophe. This immediately hung me up, got frustrated, didn't know what was going on, and it took me a long time to figure it out. So you can benefit from my suffering. Turns out, when I looked in my catalog, I had over 14,000 curly apostrophes and over 8,000 straight ones. So I'm not going to go back into my collection and fix that if I even could. And as new pictures come in, depending on where they came from, they could have either kind of apostrophe. This program is going to make me care about that. It's going to make me do the thing I probably should have done in the first place, and probably did do most of the time when I was doing a search like this. And that's to skip the whole thing, and I will just search Art Maggie. And how might that work, you might ask? Well, both of these programs, Photo Mechanic Plus and this one, search on strings, not words. That seems like a bad thing the first time you say it, but it turns out to be a really good thing. By truncating this to Art Maggie, I'm going to get the same results, or almost exactly the same results, without worrying about that apostrophe or the S, which means I could do the same thing with words that are plural. I could do the same thing sometimes with names. The risk in doing this is if I have a word that often comes as a component to another word. Cat is a perfect example. Cat, if I'm not looking at the whole word, I'm just looking at the string of letters, C-A-T, is going to come back for catastrophe. It's going to come back for Catalina, the island, catatonic, no snarky comments, please, and maybe Bellingcat, right? Well, that's either a problem or it's not a problem. I do the search, and if I come back with a whole lot of junk like that, I have to think about something else to do. Well, in Photo Mechanic, that's just muscle memory. In Photo Mechanic, I can delimit the search and force it to search for a literal string, a word, by putting it in double quotes. What happens if I do that here? Well, let's just see. Let's say I put Maggie in double quotes, and it returns nothing. And I may have actually put a space in the wrong place. Doesn't matter. If I do the double quotes thing, I'm going to get nothing. There, proved. So, oops, there's a piece of functionality that was programmed into my typing fingers, which very often are not connected to my thinking brain. It's not going to work anymore. We're going to look later at replacing that functionality if we still want to do this in NeoFinder. Right now, we can just take comfort in the fact that we don't have to do that particular thing that often. If a search is more complicated than that, and so we're down to 1 or 2% of the times we search anyway. So if some of these things take a little more time in this program, it's really not going to hurt us very much. We can go over here to the magnifying glass icon, and that is going to bring up what NeoFinder calls the Find Editor. And what this thing is a query builder. We've seen these things before. They're very common in all-in-one photo management programs, and they're very common in email programs. The idea of it is that we will build our query one line at a time in this contraption, and we could say Well, let's do our Maggie search again. In this column of flyouts, we can choose things. Sometimes this is really structured. Sometimes this column is literally fields, the next column is literally operators, and the last column is for text input. That didn't work out for this particular developer because this first column would be 4 feet deep and the second column would only be a couple of inches. So he's doubled up a little bit. But in any case, we can do an any text search on, we did Maggie, right? So let's do Maggie just for the heck of it. And there we go. And we actually start at the same place. And if we look down here, we'll see how many items we returned. And I have to assume that it's probably, yep, it's more because we're not just doing Maggie and our art class. Now, this is what we did up here. Any text doesn't really mean any text. It's a broad default set of fields that you search against. NeoFinder has one. Photo Mechanic Plus had one. NeoFinder's broad set of default fields is broader than Photo Mechanic Plus's, but that's just the way it goes. I suppose I should point out that in Photo Mechanic Plus, we ultimately had the ability to search on a zillion fields. We had the ability to search basically on any IPTC field that matters, including some of the rare ones like plus rights field. You could search for the licensor's email address if you wanted to. NeoFinder works with a much smaller subset of fields that we're allowed to search in. Now, all those fields are supported, I guess we should say, or protected. If they're in your picture, they're going to stay in your picture. We're just not going to be able to access them or work with them in this particular program. And the other thing that we're doing over here by default is one step up from that flyout. We are searching across every catalog file in NeoFinder. If you remember in Photo Mechanic Plus, we had an array of tick boxes that would do pretty much exactly the same thing. In Photo Mechanic Plus, we could turn read write on or off and have either read only or read write for each of our catalogs. Can't do that here, but then again, the situation is a little bit different here, so we kind of don't need to. We can do every catalog, or we can do selected catalogs, which we could do in Photo Mechanic Plus by turning catalogs off and on. If we choose selected catalogs, we don't choose them over here in the left rail, which might be closed or hidden or whatever. We get this modal dialog, and we choose a catalog or two catalogs or however many over here. And if we hit the Save button, nothing tremendously permanent happens. It just chooses those catalogs to search against. Now, this is a potential gotcha because it isn't as obvious as the one in Photo Mechanic Plus, and we could very easily leave it on a setting that we don't want at the moment. We could leave it on some selected set of catalogs when we want every catalog, or it could be just different catalogs than the one we want to do right now. Now, we have the ability to label with color labels the various catalogs that we want. This gives us the same functionality that the snapshot gave us in Photo Mechanic Plus. In Photo Mechanic Plus, we could have a preset that said these catalogs, not those catalogs, or whatever. Here, we just do this by color labeling different sets of catalogs and choosing a color label in that flyout. Okay. The next flyout, and let me set that back before I make the mistake that I just described. The next flyout is all of the following are true, and it's only got one other value. Any of the following are true. This is the difference between a Boolean and or a Boolean or. So we'll leave that set at all, which is the and, which is where we will have it set 99% of the time once again, and we will make a query. Let's do a search for a fellow we know as John Smith. We could have done this up here. This is a simple enough search. We could have just gone John, could have gone Smith, hit the button, bang. There are our John Smith pictures. John Smith is not real. These are silly free stock photos. And yeah, I know, free stock. Nobody should use free stock. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm ashamed of myself. If we want to do this search here, we do choose where we're going to search. I'll just do any text, contains, and I'll do John. I add another row. These two pull downs stay the same. And I can do Smith. Hit the button. We're back to our same Smith photos. Over here, we can choose different sorts of things. We can choose significantly to search in IPTC fields, which is pretty much what we're used to in Photo Mechanic Plus. And I could do that, and I could go IPTC, and instead of having contains and does not contain right here, I can choose the field. I can choose caption contains John. And I could do the same thing again for Smith and get the same results. So that's kind of how it works. One line equals one search term. If they're ANDed together, they're either all ANDed together, each and every line, and we're allowed 16 of them, by the way, or they're all ORed together. 16 is way plenty, and of course, if we're doing ORs, 3 is probably more than we'll ever use in our whole life. Let's look at our results for Mr. Smith here. If we take this picture here, Mr. Smith was an AND search, right? John and Smith. So I will move the caption up to where it's above my camera, and we see that we have a picture here of Julie Smith and John Cole. Oops. But that's just the way searching works. Work that way in Photo Mechanic Plus. Frankly, it works that way in every damn program. What we're doing when we do an AND search is we are searching for objects that have the word John in them and have the word Smith in them. So John is here, Smith is here. The order in which we do this doesn't matter. That applies whether we do it here or whether we do it there. Well, what if we wanted to just search for John space Smith? I don't recommend doing this in the slightest, but let's take Smith out of there. Let's make that term go away. We'll put a space in, and we'll type in Smith up here. Now we're going to literally search for John space Smith. And we're going to get just one picture of the actual fictional John Smith. But this is probably not a good idea at all, because what if it was John H.W. Smith or John something else Smith? In that case, we wouldn't hit. We'd be out of luck. But we do have the ability to search a string that spans words. In other words, a string that has a space in it. We could do this up here, and we'll do the same thing. Well, first we'll show you that it is really an AND search. I'll do Smith, John, boom, and there we got the same returns. But if I turn it around and I do John space Smith, and I tell the program that I want to search that entire string, including the space, I do that with double quotes and get back to the place that we were at a second ago. Now, this is a little bit interesting. That's double quotes. That's no punctuation whatsoever. You just type in the string that you want to type in, and that's what you get. If I put quotes around that string, it would search for quotes, John, space, Smith, quotes. Okay? Two different syntaxes. And we have behavior here that is not quite what we're used to in Photo Mechanic Plus. Behavior here that is not quite what we're used to either. It's syntactically completely different. That's kind of why I'm suggesting, at least at the beginning with this program, you might want to skip this whole quick search thing altogether, because it's kind of a source of confusion. So now let's look at a piece of functionality that we had before, and it was totally great, and it absolutely worked. In Photo Mechanic Plus, we just had the one box, right? And it was the simple search box and the fancy search box all in once. Let's say I wanted to do a search for this or that and another thing. It could be mouse or mice, right? Because these are simple dams. They don't have the fancy ability to discern the plurals of words and understand what it is. So if I want to do either one mouse or a bunch of mice, that's two different search terms. So mouse or mice and habitat, right? Or names, Margaret and Maggie. We could do that by just doing, I'm going to use a real example here. I could do Steve or Stephen, and in Photo Mechanic Plus I wouldn't have to type the and. Ross, bingo, and he would return. In a big time professional dam, it's exactly the same string. As a matter of fact, it worked exactly the same way. Steve or Stephen and a space, not the and, because it was smart enough to fill in spaces, and Ross, bingo, and the guy would come up. Now, Stephen Ross is a mogul, billionaire kind of guy. He owns an American football team. I was once a sports picture editor and had to search for this guy just constantly. We all did, and it just came out of our fingers, just like that. Well, we could do that in Photo Mechanic Plus. We don't have the ability to do that here, at least not directly. So we've got to figure something out. So let's go over here to our query builder, and we'll build a Stephen Ross query. Any text contains Stephen. Any text contains Ross. Oops. Now what do we do? Because we were looking for an or. Well, if we do this thing with an or in it, it's only one or, but nevertheless, we're going to get more back than we want. We're going to get 396 pictures back, and we don't know if we got any Steves or Stevens in here at all. This just won't do. So we're going to have to figure out some other way of doing it. The first method would be do the or search and suck it up. Just sift through here until we find what we want. That's a possibility. If we come back with a reasonable number of pictures, we could just do that. And it's going to take us a minute or two, but how often do we do this thing? I do this search quote all the time, which means I probably did it once every couple of weeks. So if it takes me 15 minutes instead of taking me 1 minute, it's not that big a deal. But let's see if we can figure out some way to actually do this. Any text contains Stephen, and any text contains, we don't want to do Ross, we want to do Steve. Steve. We hit the button, and we get 339 or 49 items, something like that. I know this guy at the top is actually named Steve. Somewhere in here, we're probably going to find our picture of Mr. Ross, but it's going to be a little bit awkward. And if we came back with 2,000 pictures instead of 200, it would be really bad. So this is a situation where the size of your archive determines whether this is a big deal or no deal at all, or somewhere in between. So that is probably not going to work, but it could. We could actually search through all this nonsense until we find the right guy. But I kind of don't recommend that as a solution. We've got to find something that's going to be a little bit better. I worked out a couple of suggestions for you. If you can think of something better, more power to you. But you don't have to. You can just write mine down and use it anytime you want. So we need to combine an and an or here. We can and stuff together up here, or we can or stuff together up here. We can't mix and match. But we have a feature down here. This is a filter bar, right? And we'll go across this in a second and look at what all the different filters do. But we have this one right here, which is a search in search or search in results filter. Search in results is a specific feature in a lot of dams. And it's kind of a funny feature because the reality is that searching in results means you and another search term onto whatever you searched in the first place. In other words, you could do it up here just fine. You could even do it over there if you wanted. Let's get that out of there because that totally won't work. But we have this little box down here, this input box, and we could do it here. And this thing flies out, by the way, and it shows us several different fields that we could be doing this searching within results in. two of which matter, the IPTC caption field and the IPTC keyword field matters to us because those are standardized fields and we have those metadata in our pictures. Comment, persons, and location, probably not so much. Location is actually probably a mashup of some IPTC fields. Honest to God, I couldn't tell you. But these two are very useful. Those three are probably not. We'll leave that set on caption because where else is somebody going to be identified? So let's take Steve and Stephen, make it Steve. All right, we've already made it Steve or Stephen, so we've got that part of our search built. And let's just do and Ross. And here's the guy. It's a mogul guy who's standing by a picture of a stadium, and he owns a sports team. I am just amazed that this picture somehow followed me into my own archive, and I actually have it. But there's a way of doing it. The limitation is I can do as many ors as I want. I can do multi-fielded things here, although with ors, I shudder to think. Down here, I've got one search term. Yeah, it could have a space in it. It could be a phrase, but I have one search term and I'm anding it, which is exactly what I want to do. But I can do any number of things at the top. I can just do the one extra search term at the bottom. But this is probably going to get me through this search. 90–95% of the times I have to do this search. And we've already determined that this search is something that doesn't come up all that often. So we're golden. We can go right ahead and use NeoFinder and not even worry about it. And there is yet another way that we could do this. Let's clear this search from here. And I just don't even know what this is all about. But we'll go back to the top. We'll turn this dangerous or back to and. And again, this is one of those things, leave this thing in the wrong place. You're going to do a search. You're going to get really weird returns, and you're not going to be happy. So we have to make the habit of checking this switch to make sure it's left in the right place. But let us do this search all at once at the top. And by the way, we're going to use any text in this search. So it's good to point this out right now. With any text, we have different operators. We have contains and doesn't contain. All right, that's a not search. We're going to come back to not searches. The thing about it is, don't use it in any text because it doesn't work. You will get weirdly inconsistent, unexpected results. Just doesn't work. I'm 95% sure that is just a bug. There are ways to do not searches in this program. This particular one just absolutely isn't one of them. But we'll just do, well, we'll do this. I think we can do this whole thing in any text. So if we do any text, turn it back to contains, which is really pretty normal. So we'll do Ross up here. We can't do or as another row, right? But hey, there's a way. Any text, and this requires any text because this particular cute thing is only available in any text. We will do a regular expression. Now, regular expressions are scary. They're just plain terrifying. I just don't know. Maybe it's just a phobia, maybe it's only me, but they scare the bejeebers out of me. But this is actually pretty simple. This is thanks to the documentation of NeoFinder, by the way. That's where I found this. We can do our regex here, and we can type in Steve and a pipe symbol, and we'll do Stephen. Hit find, and here we go. We have just done Steve or Stephen and Ross. I suppose I should have done this on the first column so that it would read in that direction. But that's the crux of it. We did Ross and Steve, the funky little regex thing that we don't understand, but now we know that it works. We just write it down someplace. A regex pipe is the same thing as an or. We've done an and, or search. And we've gotten our guy here. But we've also picked up a piece of noise, which kind of doesn't matter. This guy clearly is the owner of a sports team. This guy is some kind of electrician or something like that. I think he's actually some sort of emergency worker. And just in case anybody is totally cringing, I'm really pretty sure that this panel that he's touching is de-energized. It's a building that burnt down. The whole building is de-energized. Thus, the fact that he's using the flashlight. And this guy is Stephen Lohman, okay? And Steve, S-T-E-V-E, hit, because we're looking for the string. We weren't actually looking for the word Steve, and it doesn't matter, certainly not in this particular case. And where did Ross come from? Well, that's why I did this search as any text, because Ross actually is here. Red Cross helping the victims of the fire is the headline for this particular story or this particular picture. And Ross, R-O-S-S, is part of Cross. Okay, that's just really interesting. It's noise in this particular case, but it shows us how these things work. We will come back to the business about forcing NeoFinder to look for words rather than strings, because this is not actually terribly easy. Second ago, I mentioned a not search. That's another one of those things where in Photo Mechanic Plus, it was really easy, or at least really straightforward. We just typed the word not. How are we going to do this over here? Well, a second ago, I've already mentioned that if you choose any text, you have the opportunity to choose between contains, begins with, ends with, is, isn't, doesn't contain, and those sorts of things. Well, doesn't contain is a not. I said, don't do that. It doesn't work. This is NeoFinder 921. I'm pretty sure this is a bug. By the time you watch this video, it may be squashed, and we may be able to just go right ahead and do that. But for the time being, we know it doesn't work in any text. We have some other choices in here. As we slide down this list, and this first stanza of this list is like sort of generalized things that we can search for across all content types, I suppose, whatever. We have a choice here for keywords. Well, if we actually choose this, keywords is real live IPTC keywords. I don't think there's any other kind really. We can go ahead and use this particular keywords gizmo to our heart's content. So let's whip up a search here, and we will do a not in keywords. So I shoot a lot of flowers and things like that. So we'll do any text contains garden, right? Hit the button, and what do we get? We get about 6,000 returns back. And we've got, I don't know, at the top here, we seem to have animals, butterflies, ducks, whatever, but garden layouts. Yeah, flowers. We got some flowers in here. So I keyword plants according to color because I don't know anything about plants, and I know whether it was red or green or yellow or whatever. So plants are keyworded by color. Let us just say that I did or did not want garden things that are red. Well, there we have it, 737 red garden things, red flowers and stuff like that. If I go here to no keyword contains, that's a not, right? Now, if I hit the button, I will have garden stuff that's yellow and green and animals and whatnot, and nothing that I keyworded as red. I think those I called orange, all of those things. So you see how it works. And I went from specifying a keyword to knotting the keyword, so I actually have more returns on this particular search. But we can see how it works. We eliminated our red garden things by knotting that keyword. Now, this keyword here is the same as, if we go to IPTC, and we go over here to keyword, but look here, in this column, we're searching the same field here, but in this column, we can't do does not contain. We can't do a not. We can't do a not in the caption either. We'll go back to the keyword. And so we can contain red, but we can't not contain red. However, as of NeoFinder 921, which came out just a few days before I started working on this, we have a new feature. Many of our fields, including almost all of our searchable IPTC fields, have this little gear thingy. The little gear thingy signifies this. Now this is actually a flyout, and you see I have characters that I can type in here that mean things. And 2 exclamation points means does not contain. Hello, I should actually be able to insert that there. Whatever. Doesn't matter, because the way that we'll really do this in real life is we'll type the 2 exclamation points and we'll type red. And we should get our not red search, which comes back to the same number of returns. And as we scroll through them, we can see that we've eliminated pretty much all of our red flowers. Now, some of these may be things that the ones that look like the kind of red. Some of them I may have coded them. Well, we'll look at that one. I think I called that flower orange when I did those keywords. No, I didn't code the color at all. So that's why we actually have a bigger return here. But the point is, we can do a not search in almost any IPTC field by just knowing that we can do this exclamation point operator in the input box here, and that turns it into a not. And we know that we can do that in any field that has the little gear. So that is one pretty cool way to do a not. We can do a not when it makes it easy for us, and we can do a not that way in just about any field that we want to. So that's pretty cool. We did nots. Now, what about if we want to do a specific word, not a string within a word? We saw a second ago how the string Steve came back in Stephen. Well, let's see if we can find only the Steves in our database. So we'll pop over here, we'll clear this search out, and we could do, well, let's just do any text contains Steve. All right, and we get 336 items, most of whom probably are going to be legit Steves. Let's do Stevens. Now we got Stevens in this return. I think if I go down to the very bottom of it, yeah, here's our electrical board guy, and we know his name is Stephen, not Steve. So let's find all our Stevens. We do all of our Stevens, and we get 173. So there's pretty many Stevens as well. How are we going to do just Steve? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, if you think about what makes a word different from just a string of letters, and it's, well, gee, the word has spaces before and after it. We can search for spaces in here, so we'll do space, Steve, space. See what we get. Well, that guy is legitimately Steve, and if I hit the correct button, I get 63. So I'm well on my way. But what happens if there is, let's say Steve is the last word in a sentence. Well, now we have a period at the end, and so this isn't going to work. And this is probably going to be a search where we are looking for a picture to satisfy our needs, not a specific picture. So we're not going to know if it really doesn't work or not. We could be missing out on 100 Stevens or something. So that's not going to work, 100 Steves. So there was a movie, The Night of 1,000 Stevies. That was something entirely different, I think. So what are we going to do? Well, wouldn't it be cool if we had like a wild card that meant a space or some kind of punctuation? Return if there's a space, or if there's return if we have some kind of punctuation there. That'd be a really cool thing. Well, we'll go back to our old nemesis, regular expressions. I have a phobia about regular expressions, but I suppose they really probably aren't that terrifying. Regular expressions are used by coders, and it's a system of symbols that are logical operators that sort things out, kind of like the Booleans that we're used to in this business. They're really powerful. Maybe there is a regular expression that will get us what we want. And as it turns out, yeah, there is. A little time on the internet, and I found this thing of beauty here. And we'll put it before and after our search string of Steve. And if you care, it is a left square bracket, a space, a backslash, a lowercase p, a left curly bracket, an uppercase P, a right curly bracket, and a right square bracket. That just rolls off the tongue, right? Unless you do this every single day, you're never going to remember that sequence of letters and symbols. So you're going to do the same thing that I did, which is to record it in a keep note or something like that and cut and paste it when you need it. And in fact, I'll try to put it in the description. Lacking that, it will certainly be in the blog post version of this video. So let's give this thing a whirl. With this thing stuck before and after our Steve string, and we have chosen regex over here. And remember, we have to do this in any text because that's the only field that regular expressions work in at this time in NeoFinder. We hit the Find button, and now this is going to run really slowly. That is the drawback to doing this. That's in the documentation, by the way. NeoFinder readily admits that regex expressions run really pretty slow. But, we'll think happy thoughts and hum a tune or something, and yes, okay, finally, we have our results back. And now we have all of our Steves, and our Stephen at the bottom should be gone. Yes, he is. So, woohoo, this works. Is this as easy? Is this as fast? No, it absolutely isn't, because you're going to have to dig up that regular expression. You're going to have to paste it in at both places, blah, blah, blah. You can't use it in fielded searching because we only have regular expressions in any text, yada, yada. Is that really going to make us suffer? No, because this just isn't a thing that we do every day. I use Photo Mechanic Plus literally every day or every other day, and this is a thing that I would only have to do once a week, maybe once every couple of weeks. And we do, of course, have the option of just not bothering, just manually sorting through our return and looking and getting what we want. And if it's something that we can do visually, like the difference between a flower and a semi-truck, we're golden. If it's a case of a name, well, that's not going to be as easy because we would have to look through our metadata or just know. I happen to know that this guy is an outdoor writer by the name of Steve Cantor. I've worked with him before. And, it would be easy enough if I was looking for a picture of Steve, type in Steve, and the fact that that electrical panel guy might come into the bottom of the search and a bunch of other stuff really doesn't matter. I find the Steve I want and I go on. But this gives us a tool to replace functionality that we lost. And that's what we want to do. We want to have the warm and fuzzy to know that if we could do it in Photo Mechanic Plus, we can do it in NeoFinder. Maybe it takes a little while longer, but we'll be able to do it nevertheless. Okay, so now let's talk time. If we go up here to the top of our query builder, go to the first column and go down, we have the option to search for the creation date of our picture or the modification date. But, warning, danger, Will Robinson, this is the file create date or modified date, which could make a great deal of sense if you're talking about types of files like, say, PDFs or something that have neither IPTC nor EXIF metadata embedded. So don't go here. That's another thing that will cause you a half an hour of new to NeoFinder confusion. You'll get unexpected results. You'll be frustrated and you'll distrust the program, not because it did anything wrong, just because we didn't know what it was going to do. And yeah, the labeling here could be a whole lot clearer. To digress for just a moment on the way to where we need to go next, we need to go next to look at the IPTC fields. because the IPTC date field is really the authoritative one, in my opinion. The file creation date's not really what we want, even though it might match. What we want to know is when the camera went click. What happens when the camera goes click is the camera writes that information into an EXIF field, because cameras write EXIF. EXIF is where cameras keep their logging data, right? The camera writes that information into a field called date time original in the EXIF data block, as well as potentially 1 or 2 or 3 more different EXIF fields, plus the file field, which may or may not match. And trust me, it probably won't. So we want to go maybe over here into our IPTC fields and look at this. This is XMP parenthesis IPTC. If we go over here and we look at our metadata over here, we have XMP slash IPTC. Okay, folks, what we're talking about here is IPTC fields. IPTC, which stands for International Press Telecommunications Council, is a standards body. They write the standard that governs metadata, that's descriptive metadata for pictures. That's what we all use, whether we're in the press or telecommunicating or not. Descriptive metadata for pictures is governed by the IPTC standard. Yeah, there are other standards, but they're edge cases and we may never run into them. There's a standard for librarians who catalog fine art. There's a standard for printers. There's all kinds of special case standards. The normal standard that we all use is the IPTC one. IPTC metadata can be seen in 2 places in the top of our files. One is a data block called the IIM data block, Information Interchange Model, if you care. That was actually developed by the IPTC back in the mid-90s when they came up with this whole metadata for photographers thing. The other data block is the XMP data block. XMP stands for Extensible Metadata Platform. It was developed by Adobe in the early 2000s, and it was released as a public standard in 2009 by Adobe. And there was hope at the time, hope springs eternal, hope and expectations, I guess, if you were Adobe, that there would be a, quote, orderly transition, unquote, from the old and unfashionable legacy IIM data block to the new and fashionable XMP one. All right, it's been way more than 15 years. That has not happened, and it's probably never gonna happen. So we're stuck with having these 2 data blocks, and we're stuck with having our information in both of them, probably forever, and we have to keep them in sync. Now, some people, don't know why, have conflated IIM and the original 20 or so metadata fields that fit into it with the IPTC itself. And XMP, while it's not a metadata standard, it is just a place, and it is a standard in a sense. It's a semantic standard. Anybody can make XMP metadata and can embed it into photos. That's actually a good thing. IPTC metadata, all of it, all almost 200 fields or 100 depending on how you count arrays, are written into XMP as well as the 20 into IIM. That's just a whole bunch of confusing nonsense that means nothing to us right now. This is IPTC metadata that we're talking about. That's it. That's all we're saying. And an irony here is that when NeoFinder talks about XMP, it's usually not XMP at all, because there's a thing called read order. We're seeing in NeoFinder probably 95% of the time where it talks about XMP, we're actually seeing the IPTC data from the IIM data block. Okay, so what a mess. Metadata is confusing, but there kind of was a point to me telling you this. So we want to go over here to the IPTC data, and we can find in the IPTC data the capture date, which is the IPTC date created field. And remember, the camera goes click, The camera writes the time into the EXIF field, and then some human being comes along in photo mechanic and captions a picture. And at this point, we have a choice in photo mechanic. There's a pull down, and we can choose to either take the EXIF creation time, date time original, put that value into the IPTC field, or we can choose to put today's date in the IPTC field, or we can put an arbitrary date in the IPTC field. In my view, the most recently edited metadata is usually the best metadata. In this particular case, if it's in the IPTC metadata, a human being at least nominally signed off on it. The value that's in the EXIF metadata could be, and very, very often is, way wrong. Camera clocks are notoriously inaccurate, and who sets them anyway? A lot of people just don't, and then they get weird dates. They're in 1970 or something. So the more authoritative date is the one in the IPTC field, in my opinion. But we go over here, and yeah, we can search against this date. We can do the capture date is, the capture date is before, or the capture date is after. So if we want to do the capture date is in 2024, we have to take a date, that's like the last day of 2023, and we have to say after that date, and we take the first date of 2025 and we say before that date, and that's going to give us 2024. What a pain. Okay, if we go back over here, let's go to our EXIF fields, and first thing we notice is there aren't very many EXIF fields. There are, in fact, hundreds of EXIF fields. They have subsetted EXIF rather cruelly. We have a very tight selection of EXIF fields. But that's fine, because by the time a picture is in our archive, EXIF really isn't that big a thing. We very rarely need to refer to it. Yeah, we want to preserve it for darn sure, but we very rarely use it for that much. And as far as that goes, Photo Mechanic doesn't show us a massive number of EXIF fields either. But in any case, here we have capture date. They're using the same words for it that they used in the file creation date item, that they used in the IPTC date created item, and we're using it here for some EXIF field, presumably date time original. But remember, date time original is very likely what we have in our IPTC field anyway, and that's the most authoritative, right? So, hey, we can come over here and we have no less than 13 flavors of searching for capture date, including one that is in year, what we talked about before, after, in year, in the month, in any year, in winter, spring, summer, fall. We have all of these choices and we should be good to go. Great. So if we want to do a search for capture date is in, and oops, I don't want any year. Let's do capture date is in year. Bingo. And in our input box, we have the ability to type in just the year we want. Well, that's grand, but it's the EXIF. Does that bother us a little bit? Well, no, actually, here's the thing. This is actually 95, 99%, most of the time in NeoFinder, the IPTC field. This bothers me, frankly, because I think if somebody goes to the trouble of selecting the EXIF field, they want to know what's in the EXIF field. They're taking the risk about knowing that the camera clock could be wrong or whatever, but they want to see what the camera clock said. They don't necessarily want to see the field that Carl says is the more authoritative one. I mean, I'm flattered, but they just don't want to do that. The reality in NeoFinder is that when you go to this thing in EXIF, you're going to get the IPTC one, so you might as well go to where you have the more convenient operators. Now, you might not get the IPTC one. There is a thing called read order. Remember how IPTC data exists in two places? Well, each program has to decide where to look for it, and they have to look in those two data blocks, and they have to look in one first before they look in another. Now, some programs are clever enough to send up a flare if the two don't match. Most of them are not. So we're just going to take it as an article of faith that most of the time, what's in the IIM is going to match what's in the XMP. But if one is missing, we have to fall back. Some programs look first for what's in the XMP. It's the most modern, supports all character sets, doesn't have character limits on the various fields, yada yada. And our most modern file formats, things like WebP and Hike and AVIV, only carry XMP metadata. Ping is another one that only carries XMP metadata, as opposed to JPEGs and TIFFs and PSTs and DNGs, which generally carry both. So you look in, say, XMP first. If it's not there, well, then you look in IIM. And if it's not there, if it's one of the 3 or 4 fields that have a semantic equivalent in the EXIF, well, you could try over there too. That's the way it works. In NeoFinder, in all cases that I've been able to find, the reading order is first look for the old legacy IIM. If you don't find it there, look in the XMP, which would be the same field, hopefully. The same field is the same field for sure, but hopefully it'll have the same value in it. And if you don't find it there, as a last resort, look for it in EXIF. So that's what you've got. Even though we have selected EXIF, we aren't going to see it probably because EXIF is the last resort if that information does not exist in those other places. And I may as well say it right here, even though it belongs in the working with metadata section of the video. IIM, then XMP, then EXIF is not a stupid choice. That's the choice that the Mac operating system uses. If you do file info on a file, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see the IIM caption if it exists. If it doesn't exist, you're going to see the XMP caption. So that's what's going on here. That is a pitfall. It is a potential gotcha, and it's also a potential shortcut in this program. So let's go back here, just to have something simple on the screen, and we'll pull up John Smith. Okay, before we do anything else and before I forget, let's go back down once again to this filter bar at the bottom of our search return. We have some very useful buttons here. Filter options turns off and on various sorts of things. What do we probably want to do? At the top, it's different file types or different media types, photos, videos, audios, folders, and quote-unquote others, which could be, say, text files or PDFs or things like that, because NeoFinder can do those files. And it does audio for real, by the way, using ID3 tags for metadata so that it can do music, MP3s, whatever. And that matters to us as photographers, not only because we might just have music files that we want to use in our projects, but also because we now have voice recorder on our telephones and things like that. So we could end up with interviews or IDs or whatnot as audio files. So good for NeoFinder. We can turn those things off and on, add a click. Under that button, we have ratings. Ratings, and I'll try to make them pop up here, and oh my gosh, I'm in front of them. Heaven forbid. I'll move over to the other side. So ratings is a pop-up. Hey, it's star ratings. It works just like the ones in Photo Mechanic, except the interface is different. You can choose numbers of them, 1 through 5, and greater than or equal to 1 through 5. Same thing that we would do in Photo Mechanic, just a different interface. Photo Mechanic and Photo Mechanic Plus for that matter. Labels work the same way. I guess I need to jump back to the other side again, don't I? Labels work the same way. And by the way, you can't see the absolute bottom of my screen, so when I drag things to the Photo Mechanic icon in the dock, for example, you couldn't actually see the icon. Trust me, it's there. That's because my monitor is not really 16 by 9, and I haven't figured out how to make the dock and the menu bar both appear in my screen movie. So there we go. However, in labels, we have another area of contention. Now, star ratings are an IPTC standardized field. If you have a standards compliant program and you give an item 3 stars in it, you'll have 3 stars in any other standards compliant program. which is not to say that there aren't rogue programs out there that have stars that don't bother to write them into the file's metadata, or don't bother to write them into the file's metadata correctly according to the standards. That's just life. But NeoFinder is a pretty professionally written program. That said, color labels are not standardized, but they're kind of a little bit, shall we say, not standardized. Let's say they have a little bit of commonality about them. As far as I know, color labels appeared first in photomechanic. And first, it was a proprietary photomechanic field in the XMP group. Remember, anybody can make a namespace in the XMP group and have fields. You can, I can, and so photomechanic certainly can. And the idea caught on. So then we had other players coming in, and they were doing color labels too. The difference being that their color labels just might not match photomechanics in any way. Now, people settled on a certain field in the XMP and put their color label information in that field. What they didn't settle on was how many color labels they were going to have and what they were going to call them. And in that field, in the XMP, color labels are identified by a text string that goes with them. And photomechanic, by the way, has a mechanism to synchronize their field with this field. Photomechanic has 8 color labels, and it allows you to customize them any which way you want. You can customize them to match the color labels in other programs. Adobe Lightroom, which is kind of the elephant in the room, has only 5 color labels. Otherwise, anywhere from the 5 of Lightroom to 15 or so. Some programs allow you to customize, some programs don't. Many people, me included, have chosen to go with the Adobe 5 that are in Lightroom as kind of a lowest common denominator. And in photomechanic, I programmed my color labels, the first 5 to match Lightroom's, and then I have 3 that I marked in their names as not Adobe safe, and I don't use them very often. But color labels are to be used for temporary purposes, let's say. They're not to be used for archive purposes. The fellow who develops NeoFinder advises that rather strongly in his documentation. He says use color labels to organize things in NeoFinder, and that's that, and don't count on any compatibility. But at the same time, he gives you a link right in the documentation to find an XML file that will program NeoFinder to use in the first 5 spaces Adobe Lightroom's color labels. And he's got another program that does Adobe Bridge's color labels. And it would be really nice, and yeah, I'll suggest it as a matter of fact, if he would write one that would do Photomechanics 8. What I've done is I've used his XML file that does the 5 because I knew going in, and this is another one of those things that we talk about here and more in the blog post, the moment you move into a system, you have to understand that you're going to move out of it. So I don't use color labels for anything archival or important, and I use the 5 Adobe ones virtually all the time. I just don't even remember that I've really ever used the other 3, although I may have at some point or another. All that said, I would really like for my color labels that I've assigned to my pictures to read correctly in NeoFinder. I have not been able to figure out how to hack that XML markup to make for myself a file that will program the photomechanic defaults. Maybe Mr. Dorner will do that for us. Maybe he won't. Kind of doesn't matter. If I do a search right over here for No King's Day, we'll just do No King. And we get a whole lot of stuff that's not No King's Day. Sorry. Let's do No Kings and see if we get a better result. Yes, we get not necessarily demonstrations, but we at least get things that kind of look like that. And I just happen to know that when I do an assignment like this, I use the green color marker for a certain thing. You know, these are pictures that I probably will turn in, is what it really amounts to. And yeah, here they are. I did them in green. They came out in green. That is because I set my NeoFinder label mechanism to recognize that lowest common denominator, Adobe 5. And I did it in that part of this interface. Now, another thing that we can do in Photo Mechanic Plus that we absolutely can't do now, and for very logical reason. What if we do a search like this and we want to act on files that aren't necessarily in the same folder? And here we have, oh my gosh, I'm spending my life lately typing the phrase Ed's Note Course language. But in any case, this is some sort of street art festival. That's some sort of No King's Day protest. What if I want to do something to a selection of photos that are from both of these folders, both of these two different assignments? Well, in Photo Mechanic Plus, I could do anything that Photo Mechanic could do, or almost anything that Photo Mechanic could do to any search return, regardless of what physical folders the objects lived in. Well, can't do that anymore. We just kind of can't do that. What we're going to have to do, if we actually have to do that, if I want to work on that picture and that picture, is do it in two pieces. I can drag that picture to Photo Mechanic, and it's going to open in the folder that it lives in, and I can drag this picture to Photo Mechanic, and it's going to open in the photo that it lives in. There you go. That's my answer to that problem. It's not a terribly satisfactory answer, but it's really not that big a problem. How often do we actually have to do that? Now, if I wanted to, from NeoFinder, take these two photos and just simply, well, I was going to say export, but that's not the thing. If I want to take those photos and just copy them to the desktop, I can just drag them to the desktop, bang, job done, no problem. I could also select those two folders, and I could do that over here, save copy as, no problem. But we have lost that one little piece of functionality that we had, and I don't know of any way to get it back other than just doing stuff manually. And again, how often do we want to do it? How hard is it really going to be if I have pictures in 2 or 3 different folders to do that? It's not going to be very hard. So that's just kind of how this whole process goes. We look for the functionality that we want. We look for the functionality that we need. Hopefully we have the serenity to know that they aren't going to be the same thing, and we move along. And hopefully it helps knowing that. And hopefully I'm helping at least a little bit by pointing out these areas where the functionality doesn't match, and you very well might get results that you're not expecting. And when you do that, you very well might be frustrated and you might distrust this program. That's natural. That's survival instinct. If stuff's not working the way you want it to work or way you expect it to work, you start to wonder if it's working right. As near as I can tell, and I've worked with this thing now for many hours. I thought this was going to be easy, but it actually has taken many hours. As near as I can tell, NeoFinder does, in fact, work correctly. If you know the way it works, you're going to get expected results. So that about wraps it up for searching. I'm sure that this video all by itself is really long, and it's contributing to the probably enormous length of the combined video. But we will see you again in either the third video, or we can all go for a cup of coffee and we'll meet right back here and we'll talk about working with and editing metadata in NeoFinder. Hi, if you're just coming back after a well-deserved coffee break, Welcome back. If you are just joining us, this segment or this video is the third part of our three-part series on how to use NeoFinder as a replacement for the plus functionality in Photo Mechanic Plus. There are two other videos in the series. One introduces NeoFinder and goes into how to migrate our collection to NeoFinder. And the second middle video talks about searching in NeoFinder and working out some workarounds for functionality that we had in Photo Mechanic Plus that we don't have or have indirectly, let's say, in NeoFinder. That one is pretty long and it's pretty detailed, but it's also pretty important in that it will save you a lot of time working that stuff out for yourself. In this video, we're going to talk about looking at metadata in NeoFinder and editing metadata in NeoFinder. And the big theme there is, do we actually even want to do that? I have to assume going in that if you're watching this video, you already have a copy of Photo Mechanic. The entire point here is that we're talking about using NeoFinder alongside Photo Mechanic. If we already have Photo Mechanic, there's a strong argument to be made that says if we need to edit metadata on pictures that are already in our archive, committed to our digital asset management system, well then we should just do that in Photo Mechanic. So this might, for many of us, be a pretty short video. So we'll go over the pros and cons of doing it both ways. And yeah, indeed, I've got a recommendation. But first, let's just take a look at what metadata looks like in NeoFinder. This thing on the right-hand side, the right rail of NeoFinder, is called, or called by NeoFinder, the inspector or the metadata inspector. It's a pretty straightforward sort of device. We see a preview at the top, we see some file info, and then we have some collapsible sections that expand to show us information in different parts of the metadata. The important bit, what we're all sort of interested in, is this one. This is your IPTC metadata. Now, labeling in NeoFinder has been kind of a sore point with me. The label here says XMP/IPTC. Okay, IPTC is the metadata. That's the standard that defines descriptive metadata for photos. It's the industry standard. Yeah, there's some other standards, but we can just forget about them. This is the one that matters in the industry. There are two places that IPTC metadata can live. One is in the XMP data block, and the other is in the IIM data block. Okay, so IPT is the data, XMP or IIM is where the data is written in your photo. And there is a core subset of IPTC data that's written in both places. Okay, fine. Now, some people confuse IPTC and the IIM data block standard because IPTC wrote it. XMP, for its part, is a product of Adobe. Now, when you look at your IPTC metadata in this particular program, in this particular dialog, the interesting thing is that very rarely will you be looking at XMP metadata. It's one of the two places, remember, except for fields that don't exist in the IIM. Most of the time in NeoFinder, you're looking at the IIM. Because of this business of the metadata being able to exist in two and sometimes three different places, programs have to decide how they're going to read it. And so they look in order, one place, then another place, then another place. This program looks in the IIM data block first. If the data is there, it displays it. If not, it looks in the XMP data block. And if it's there, it displays it. And lacking that, in the case of just a couple of fields where there are three semantically equivalent fields, it looks in the EXIF data. So IIM, then XMP, then EXIF. Virtually all the time, and for us, because we have Photo Mechanic, unless we have done something that I would consider pretty silly in our preferences, Photo Mechanic keeps our data in sync. So we're going to have both an IIM and an XMP version of the data. So we're going to see IIM data in this data block all the time. That matters a little bit to us data-wise. IIM does not support as many character sets as XMP, and IIM imposes length limits on the fields. Significantly, the caption is, I believe, 4,000 characters in length or less, which is probably a lot more than you'll write in a caption, but if you have one that's longer, it'll be truncated when you look at it here. Now, some people might say, XMP is more modern. Why in the world does anybody look in the IIM first? Well, the reality is IIM is the legacy place for the data. There are lots and lots of programs that read and write only IIM. And more importantly for NeoFinder's developers is the fact that that read order, IIM, then XMP, then EXIF, is the Macintosh standard itself. If you look at get info for a picture in Macintosh and you look at your caption, unless it's not there, it's going to show you the IIM version. Now, it does have to be said that there are some IPTC fields that only appear in XMP. And if we scroll up just a little bit here, here are two of them. The alt text and extended description fields, both of which have to do with access or accessibility, are only in the XMP. So there we have it. And altogether, I believe there are just short of 30 fields in this subset of the IPTC fields that are displayed here in NeoFinder. And that's a pretty good deal. That's a pretty good subset. It is about what you would find probably in most other programs like Lightroom or something like that. There are altogether, depending on how you count, between 100 and 200 IPTC fields. No GUI program, apart from a plugin to Adobe Bridge, can display all of the IPTC fields. Now, that brings up a kind of important point. What about fields that this program can't display? What happens to them? Well, not to fear, they are still there. Let's look at this picture right here. Okay, we can see the information that are in our 40 fields. Well, what about something that isn't? Something, say, rights information. Well, if we jump over to Photo Mechanic and we look at this same picture and we scroll down to the bottom here, we can hit this Edit button in the licensors field and we can see a whole bunch of fields which are basically the contact information for the licensor or the person who owns a photo and who might offer it for a sale or for a license. That's kind of inside baseball, but the point is that all of my pictures indeed have my name and contact information in the licensor information, and it's perfectly fine. I have edited this picture in NeoFinder, and nothing bad happened to those fields. I just can't see them in NeoFinder, but that's okay. And by the way, this folder of pictures that we're looking at here, never fear, we are not abusing real photos. These are all crash test dummies. They're just pictures that I copied from random places. And what I did was, in NeoFinder, I made a catalog for my desktop. So I have this folder of pictures here, imaginatively called miscellaneous test images. And I can do anything I want to them because I'm just going to delete the folder later. And if, say, I update pictures in this folder, well, it takes literally less than 2 seconds to update that catalog because it's hardly got anything in it. And when I'm done, I'll just delete the catalog. So, free tip, that might be useful for you at some point someday. Let's scroll up a little bit here, and I can complain more about the labeling of stuff in NeoFinder. But like I said, once you know, you know. And labeling is not that easy to do, and it's especially not that easy to do when you have to do it in 12 different languages. But if we expand this EXIF pane, we have, some EXIF-ish data. We can see what the camera that made this picture was and the software and all of that sort of stuff. Now, there are, I believe, 4 fields in EXIF that are semantically equivalent to fields in IPTC metadata. EXIF data is written by the camera, and IPTC data is written by software that is controlled by human beings. In some cases, data is picked up from one of the fields and copied or synchronized into the other. Time is an example. The date created field in IPTC can be lifted from an EXIF field that records when the camera fired, or it can be written in at the time the XMP data is written in. If we look in our EXIF pane in NeoFinder, much of the stuff is EXIF data. It's obviously EXIF data, and that's just fine. But if we look here, artist, which is the same thing as byline or creator, and copyright, which is exactly what it is, are two fields that can exist in both of those data sets. The ones you see here are IIM if it exists, XMP if it doesn't exist, and EXIF if there's nothing in either one of them. But honestly, I personally think that if somebody looks for EXIF data, they should see EXIF data. And because of the very legitimate arguments around how you should treat the various kinds of data. Not all programs synchronize EXIF and IPTC at all or in the same way. So again, if I want to look at what the camera wrote, and the camera can write these two fields, and I highly suggest that you set yours to do it. It can write your name and your copyright information right there at the beginning. That very well might be different from what particularly the real copyright information might be later, and it might be really interesting to see how it changed. One or the other might be the information that you're looking for if you borrowed a camera from someone, for instance, or if you did a work for hire. I assure you, you're probably not going to go back into your camera and remove your copyright notice. It's still going to be there. And you might want to check and see if your name is in here or the actual owner of the copyright. That, I think, is potentially a problem. We talked about in the previous video the whole business of the whole business of capture date. And again, lacking anything else, this is the IPTC one. I personally think the IPTC one is more likely to be authoritative because a human being signed off on it, but there you have it. I don't think if you're looking in a place that says it's EXIF data that you actually want to see the IPTC date, even if Carl thinks it is probably the most authoritative one. Well, how about editing metadata? Now, kind of obviously, the developers of NeoFinder had to create functionality that would allow you to caption a picture in NeoFinder, because some people are going to do that. Not everybody who owns this thing owns Photo Mechanic. For us, by the time a picture is in our archive, it had to come from somewhere, and that somewhere is entirely likely to be metadata markup in Photo Mechanic. That's what Photo Mechanic is for. So this functionality is a little bit superfluous for us. It's a very strong argument that says that we know how to do this stuff in Photo Mechanic. We've used it, we've trusted it, we've maybe trusted it for a quarter of a century, and it's really powerful. If we need to edit the metadata on a picture that's already in our archive, it's probably because it's a correction of some sort. If you're me, you probably saw a hideous, stupid, and embarrassing typo in your caption, and you want to fix that. Or maybe you want to do something with the keywords. Maybe you've added a keyword to your vocabulary. Maybe your taxonomy is a little different, whatever. Maybe you just missed a keyword in a picture. That happens to me a lot. I think about something, and I have keywords for different series that I'm working on. And I go, oh, that picture would have gone nicely in that series, and I bet I didn't note that in the keyword. So I have to go back and I have to edit it. Now, where do I do it? Do I do it here, or do I just do it back in Photo Mechanic where I really know what I'm doing? Well, let's just grab a picture here and we'll look at the two possibilities. Let's take this picture of a flower here. If I want to do this job in Photo Mechanic, I just drag it down here to the Photo Mechanic icon in the Mac dock, which I apologize, you can't see because it's just outside of the field of view. There's my picture. It's still already highlighted. And if I had selected a couple of pictures, that would be the same case. And if I want to make an edit here, and you can see I've already done this once before with this picture, but we'll just do this again. I'll say edit in photo mechanic here in the caption. And what was I saying about typos? Yeah, I made one right there in front of you. Okay, I just do that. That's fine. And as soon as I click OK here or apply, if I'm in the template editor, it's going to write right into the metadata for that picture. If we jump back to NeoFinder and we look at this picture, well, our edit is not here yet. Well, of course, why would it be? Because NeoFinder hasn't read that information and written it into its database. We need to deal with that. So what we can do in NeoFinder, as a matter of fact, pretty much well, there's two things we could do. Let's look at the two possibilities. One possibility is in NeoFinder, I go to this picture and I'm in danger of disappearing behind my head here. I go then in the context menu or from the item menu up at the top to metadata, and I can do update metadata. And upon doing that, with any luck at all, our new edit that we did in Photo Mechanic appears. The other thing that I can do is I can go to my catalog. In this case, it's my little desktop catalog. And I can just update the whole catalog. Now, in my case, most of my catalogs update in a minute or two. That one updated so quickly that you might not have even been able to see the progress bar on YouTube. So no big deal. You can easily update your images in either place. If you're doing a batch of them, do it in the catalog, whatever, one at a time. And that's pretty much that. And you can do all the things that you can do in Photo Mechanic. I can append to the caption of one or multiple pictures. I can append to the keyword of one or multiple pictures. And those are the most likely things that I might have to do. I can use Photo Mechanic's super powerful find and replace features to find those stupid typos and fix them across, say, a whole folder full of pictures, which, Murphy's Law being what it is probably the case. I probably made the typo in the X matter and it's in 35 pictures and I need to fix it with 35 pictures. Now, those things I just can't do in NeoFinder. That sort of functionality just doesn't exist in NeoFinder, which is another argument for doing the stuff here. What, though, if we want to do it in NeoFinder? How does that then work? Well, it's a little bit scary to tell you the truth, but we'll pop it back over to this picture of some lady painting on a wall, and what will happen if I edit this photo in NeoFinder is all I have to do is put my cursor in a field and start typing. Now, I put the cursor in this caption field, and if I'm real careful, I can start typing here, and I can go edit in NeoFinder, and everything is cool. And notice that at no times do my fingers leave the end of my arms. I'll just click out of that picture and go back into Photo Mechanic, and we don't even have to open it because I can see it in the slide mount. Edit in NeoFinder. It's already written live into both NeoFinder's database and my photo. Now, that could be really pretty scary. If for some reason or another I accidentally delete this caption, maybe I highlighted it like I just did, and I go into it, and whoops, I highlighted it and then deselected it. Maybe I just highlight it and maybe I just hit a key. Boom, it's gone. And it's gone. It's gone here and it's gone on the photo, and we will now find out about the wisdom of that saying that you're only as good as your last backup if we've done that. That's really scary, folks. And frankly, I would take that as a strong argument for not editing metadata here in NeoFinder. It's like, yeah, maybe if it's just one picture and I'm going to be really careful. Now I can multiple select pictures and I can type in metadata and it will type into all of those pictures simultaneously. Again, destroying any metadata that might be in that field in the first place. If we were just captioning our pictures for the first time, which remember is probably what most people who use this program might do or might not, whatever. If I was doing that, this wouldn't be that scary a thing. There are a lot of programs that work like this, where you edit metadata and live as you do it, it's written into the file. That's kind of okay if you're doing it the first time. It's kind of not okay if you're in an archive where you have pictures that have valuable information attached to them and a little slip of the key will mess it up. So that's kind of the first of my recommendations, is kind of a strong recommendation. Do this in Photo Mechanic. Now let's take a look at a couple of functions in NeoFinder's menu that are worth talking about. So if we go to a picture and we go to metadata, we will find an item called Write Metadata Back to File. You would be forgiven if you were to think that what that does is write the edit that you just did in the metadata inspector back into your file, because a function just about like that exists in many of the non-destructive all-in-one programs like ON1 or Lightroom. But you and I would be wrong. What this function does, and I'm griping once again about the developer's labeling, but once you know, you know. What this function does is it is a specific fix for a specific problem that was in a now apparently abandoned and not supported DAM for videos called Kino. Kino would write metadata into proprietary fields, and by now, even only in these videos, you know how worked up I get about that. I really, really advise you to never use a program that does that for this very reason. People had their videos in Kino, and now their metadata is apparently gone. The developer of NeoFinder saw an opportunity there, and I think he gets as worked up as I do about this business of metadata being put into proprietary programs and lost to its owners. So he wrote this thing to rescue that old Kino metadata and write it into IPTC fields. And that's what this menu item does. So it's a cool thing. It is not the thing that we thought it would be. Honestly, if we hit the button, I don't know that anything bad happens, but there you have it. This one is called transfer metadata. And at first glance, this thing looks actually pretty cool. The idea of this is that you can move or copy metadata from one field to another within one file or from file to file. And it has this option to append. So you might see this and go, whoopee, I can append metadata with this thing, and it's great. I just have to work out what field I'm going to send it from and to and whatnot. I've tried it. I worked with it for a pretty long time. Frankly, the only results that I got with it were disastrous. Here is a picture whose caption was replaced by the single word null when I attempted to append something to it. It seemed to work in one file. It seemed to fail in multiple files every time. So clearly, until or unless this feature is updated, I highly recommend that you stay away from it. And again, that is just another reason to do metadata editing in Photo Mechanic. That said, one thing I found here that I liked pretty much in this metadata mechanism in NeoFinder was its treatment of keywords. Now, again, you can do this just as well, maybe better, in Photo Mechanic. So this is kind of academic, but if you want to try it, do it on crash test dummies first, but this might possibly be worth a look. Let's choose a different picture. Let's choose a cute cat doing something. And we've only got 3 keywords on it, so all right, that's fine. So if I click this little plus or go up to the window menu, I get this keywords list that looks kind of a lot like one of the keywords lists in Photo Mechanic. And it kind of works the same way. If you remember a while back, I did a video on how you can do hierarchical keywording or do keywording from a controlled vocabulary right in the keyword field in Photo Mechanic by using the type ahead feature. Well, that's exactly pretty much what we have here. So here we have this keyword list. I can take from this keyword list and drag and drop a keyword into the keywords field, and there it is. I can take a keyword here and double click it, and there it is. Or I can go into the keywords field and I can start to type, and exactly like the way I do it in Photo Mechanic, the matches, potential matches for that keyword from the controlled vocabulary pop up, and I can just click on one and I can add them. And it does append, so we're good there. And I'll click out of it and we'll look at what picture we went to, which was that one, the cat with the feathery thing. And if we go back over here into Photo Mechanic and we look at the keywords, and yes, our keywords that we added are right there. Everything is good and it's fine. It was instantaneous, but it wasn't instantaneous overwriting a bunch of stuff. So, okay, I'm completely okay with that. And if we notice, it's in proper style. We're delimiting here with a comma and a space, which is good. That is the default in most programs. Yeah, some programs want, or at least will tolerate, space pipe space, but comma and space is good. It's what we want. So this is an up to standards job, and it works in the opposite direction as well. If we delete the keywords in NeoFinder, we'll delete nature from this one, and it's gone. Click out of it and go back to Photo Mechanic, and it even jumps to show that we've done something, and indeed we have deleted the keyword. One other consideration that we might have about writing metadata in NeoFinder is what happens when we're dealing with a file format that requires a sidecar file. In other words, a proprietary file from a camera manufacturer like Nikon or Sony or something like that. Almost all of the camera manufacturers' proprietary RAW formats do not accept embedded metadata in the original file. Or to be more technically correct, you can embed metadata in the RAW file itself, but you should not. Basically, everybody says, don't do that. The camera, yes, you, no. That means that metadata for such a file, particularly IPTC metadata, has to be encoded into a sidecar file, an XMP file that goes along with it. This is a legit thing to worry about because there are some programs that muddle this up. NeoFinder, fortunately, is not one of them. So let's find a file to demonstrate this, and let's demonstrate it. Let's take this raw file here of the cat playing with something, and we are in NeoFinder, and I will just go edit in NeoFinder and see if I can manage that without a typo, and that's fine. And I will click off of it, jump to Photo Mechanic, don't even have to open it. It says edit in NeoFinder, and we will jump into EXIF tool, and we will open the XMP sidecar file for this image, and we will scroll down here and we will look into it, and if we can find the edit that we just made, that'll be proof positive that it's doing everything just fine and we're all good. And here we are. In the XMP file, we see the XMP description field, which is the same thing as the caption field. And we can see edit in NeoFinder in mixed case that I just typed in there. So there we go. So that works. All in all, I'm calling this thing a pretty much unqualified win. It seems to do everything that we want it to do. Here, I'll put NeoFinder back on the screen for you. It seems to do everything that we need it to do. It seems to do a lot of what we want to do. It seems to operate in a professional manner. The interface is straightforward. It basically just seems to work. So I'm pretty happy with it. Some quibbles? Yes, no doubt. But overall, I can recommend this pretty highly. So thank you for watching. Now, all disclaimers apply. I might be completely wrong about a lot of this stuff. Early on, I thought this would be a very quick and easy thing. Spend a couple of days with NeoFinder, learn how it works, just transfer my workflow habits from one program to the other, and that would be fine. It didn't work out that way at all. It turned out to be a really considerable undertaking, which has resulted in 3 long videos and a long blog post. And that's both a bad thing and a good thing, I suppose. It's a bad thing because you guys are subjected to these horribly long and really nerdy videos on the one hand. On the other hand, every time I got stuck and spent hours or a day or whatever in frustration trying to figure something out, maybe I have saved you from that fate. That said, if you know a better way to do any of the stuff that I've talked about in these videos, absolutely tell me, tell us, jump in the comments here, jump in the comments on the blog post, and let us know. And again, if I'm wrong about anything, please, please let us know. It's enough of a service to let us know if I'm wrong, if you just know a better, easier, faster way to do it. But heaven forbid that I might have not found something and accidentally said something that might lead somebody to destroy data. I absolutely don't want that to happen. That is the most important part of this whole endeavor. And yes, I remind you once again, don't do any of this stuff unless you have a good backup in hand before you start. And I highly recommend making some crash test dummies like I did so that you can play with these things and see how they work. And of course, you can't really search in your crash test dummy. You have to index your whole archive and search and see what happens. But I think that I've covered most of the pitfalls. I hope I've helped. I hope your time that you've invested in these videos and the blog post has worked out. And as always, mind your metadata.